Okay, welcome back, everybody. I'm going to dive right in. Still a lot to get through. I know this is a lot of material. I know it's dense. I hope it's also rich, um, and I hope meaningful. But also just remember that all this information is being recorded, and you can view it again some other time. I saw that there were a bunch of questions that were sort of pinned to be answered live, and I'm wondering if we want to do that now, those of you that have done that, or whether we were hoping to do that later.
I think later some of those are going to answer themselves as you get into the nitty gritty of how to do these surveys and how to take photographs. So at the end of those, we'll bring them back up if you don't answer them with your talk.
That sounds good. All right. So the next section here is how to participate in the project. So basically what we're going to go over is how do we, from the very beginning, if you're just brand new to the project, how do you get started? And what are the nuts and bolts of everything from how to adopt a grid cell and what that means to how to fulfill on the back end and submit your data. So I'm hoping to go over all of that over the next little bit here. Part of this will be actually watching a video about how to conduct a survey. And so I'll pause at some point and so you all can view that video. Again, at the very beginning of this, I dropped this link at the top of this cell in the chat. This will take you to a page where you can find the handbook. The participant handbook is on the left here, is where you'll find all this information laid out as clearly as at least I'm able to do it. It talks about, all the materials you'll need. It has the contact information for all the project partners. It has, I think, everything you need to get started, including pretty much everything I'm going to talk about right now. So these are the three parts we're going to go through here: is how do you set up a Bumblebee watch and adopt a grid cell? And then how do you plan before conducting a survey? And then how do you actually conduct a survey, including both the Bumblebee and Habitat form? And finally, how do you submit data online? Okay, so Bumblebee Watch is the first place that we start. Bumblebee Watch is a community science platform. It was launched by the Xerces Society and some Canadian partners, the Wildlife Preservation Canada, York University, the University of Ottawa, and eButterfly were our partners on that project when we launched back in 2014 or 2013. And when you go, you just need to, in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see an option to sign up in or sign up. If you don't have an account yet, you just need to register and provide your email address and establish a username. And then once you do that, you will actually develop a profile page. And one of the cool things about this profile page is it keeps track of all the species you've observed, and you sort of get a lifer list of the bumblebees of North America that you've had verified by experts. The important thing to remember here, or the important thing to take note of, is your username. This username is kind of the code that we use throughout the project as you're adopting grid cells and submitting data and doing these things. So you want to make sure to remember that username and write it down because you'll use it a few different times. After you have a Bumblebee Watch account, then you can think about adopting a grid cell. And the URL for this is on the screen now. So you can just go to PNW Bumblebee Atlas, and I think there's a Get Involved button at the top, and then just choose 2021 priority grids, and it'll bring you to this map page. And just to give you a brief tutorial of the map page, there are a few different buttons along the left-hand side that I'm just going to show you how to operate and what they do. So the first button there's a little home feature. If you click that, it will take it back to the view that you're seeing right now. You can also use those plus and minus buttons to zoom in on the map or zoom out of the map. And then you can click that home button to return back to this. If you want to see what the ground looks like underneath those shape files there, underneath the grid cells and underneath the high potential zones, you can turn those layers off if you click on the sort of hamburger layer here, or the hamburger button. And then you can also change the base layer. So currently the map shows aerial photography, which will show what the landscape looks like. But if you'd rather see a road map or a topographic map or some other map, there's a bunch of other options. And you can find those by clicking on this sort of four square option. And then finally, in the upper right-hand corner is a search bar. So you can type whatever search that you'd like to in that box up there. You can put your address, you can put the name of your favorite hike. It basically works like a Google map search, and it will take you to that location or zoom into that location once you select the thing that comes from the dropdown. And so that's a great way to find a place that you might want to conduct a survey. And so let's say you sort of searched for Spokane, Washington, and you were looking for an area to get involved, and you press search, and it brings you into Spokane, and then you find the nearest dark green grid cell with blue in it, and you want to get involved there and adopt that grid cell. So you might sort of, you can drag and drop the map and pull it around, and then you can find this grid cell. And once you've zoomed in far enough, the name of the grid cell will populate in the middle of the grid cell here. You can see this one is WAID, which stands for Washington and Idaho. And that's just because here's the Washington-Idaho state line right here. So this actually has parts of Washington and Idaho in it, which is why it has that leading code. And then a number. And if you click on it, that same number and code will appear up here in the box, or the pop-up that appears. And if you want to adopt this grid cell, because you want to contribute and do surveys within this grid, then you just make note of that grid cell. And then you're going to use it in the form. And so you would go then, if sort of below the map to the left, there's a different form that you would fill out, where you're going to just basically enter some basic information, including the information about the grid cell. So you enter your Bumblebee Watch username, like we talked about earlier. You've taken note of that. You've written it down. You can write it in this box here. And then you're going to use your email address. And this would be the email address that you'd like us to contact you about with this project. So if you want information about updates on the project and survey targets and all of these things, please put that email address in there. And then you're going to choose whether it's a top priority or a standard grid cell. If you got one of these dark green grid cells, you would choose top priority. If you're choosing one of the yellow grid cells or the lighter green ones, you would choose standard. And then the different grid cells within those categories are found in this drop-down box. In this case, I chose top priority because this is dark green. And then I scrolled down and selected WAID 455. The grid cells within this dropdown are by number, so that they're basically 1 to 500 or so in a number. And the reason there's two bins is because it's hard to scroll through 500. So there's around 250, and I mean, I'm making this up, but there's around 200 in top priority and 200 standard, and they're in numerical order, ignoring that leading state code. And then once you've adopted your grid cell and you've finished adopting your grid cell, you can press submit there, and it'll submit that information to us. And you should get, in pretty quick turnaround, a confirmation email from us. And that confirmation email should have information about surveys. It'll also link you to events like this. And it also links you to a Google My Maps page that will help you with additional planning. And just out of curiosity here, I'm going to find out, I would like to know which of you have adopted a grid cell already for 2021, and how many of you plan on doing this over the next several days or weeks here. Okay. That's great. It looks like around 25 of you have already adopted a grid cell and are ready to contribute, which is awesome. It looks like another 60 of you or so are interested in doing so shortly after the workshop, potentially after you learn how to do this. And then there's a couple of you that aren't sure yet, which is just fine. And basically what adopting a grid cell means is that you're signing up to participate in this project in a formal manner. It says, I'm going to take this on and I'm going to do 2 surveys within a grid cell. That's the sort of minimum ask. So adopting a grid cell means that you've sort of adopted a part of the state or one of the 3 states, and that's yours. It doesn't mean that it's just yours, though multiple people can adopt a single grid cell, but it means that you would sort of adopt that grid cell and then conduct the surveys that we're going to talk about within that grid cell. That's the idea of these grid cells. It helps us balance the search effort across the state so that we don't just get everybody surveying in Portland, Seattle, and Boise. We want to make sure to spread these efforts out across the landscape so that we get these equal effort surveys throughout the region. Oops, sorry. It takes a minute to start advancing slides again after I do a poll. Okay, next piece we're going to do here is then talk about conducting a survey and everything here. So let's say now you've adopted your grid cell, and what comes next? What are you going to do next? You'll get this email from, so we're going to go through sort of planning and then collecting data, photographing, and then uploading data. We'll go through all of those things. And so you've gotten this email, this confirmation email with a link to this Google My Map. And the Google My Map, some people have found it super helpful, other people not so much. It's totally up to you whether you choose to use it or not. This is just a way for you to get a hold of basically the grid cell map that I've shared there. So you can find your grid on this map. They're numbered the same way. It's the same numbers in the same order. And then you can see, hopefully behind that are also little polygons of these high potential zones. And one of the things you might notice, I've had a few people email me about this already, but the high potential zones here don't actually 100% overlap with the high potential zones on the main website. And that's because in order to upload a file to Google, it needs to be fairly small in size. So I had to simplify the polygons to upload them there. So you may notice some slight differences, which is okay. These are really just meant as a guide anyway. You don't have to make sure that you're in the boundaries of one of these. They're really just meant to serve as a guide, those blue polygons. But I provided them here for you as well, if that's useful. And one of the things I want you to know about this map is you can actually sort of download this map or make it your own. So if you click on those 3 dots up here in the corner, it'll pull up this dialog box. And in that dialog box, you can choose either to copy the map or to export it to KML, KMZ. And a KML, KMZ file works in a program called Google Earth, or you could upload it into a GIS program if you're familiar with those things. If you're not, don't worry about this. It's not important technical information in any way, shape, or form. I'm just making these resources available to you if you would find them helpful for planning. The reason that I find these helpful is because then you have a Google map and you can create directions, you can drop pins, places you might want to visit, and all of those other things you might show up on a normal map show up here, which is just a little bit different than the project map, which is why I've created this as a resource for you. So then after you've sort of done some of those planning things and you're starting to think about when this might happen, we've targeted our survey window from June through August. So here this says through September, but we're actually targeting through June through August is our survey window. And the idea is that we're going to survey twice in that survey window. So from between June and August, we want to do 2 surveys. And we're going to focus on these optimal conditions in terms of the temperature. So the temperature should be between 60 and 90 degrees Fahrenheit. If it's much colder than that, bees won't be very active. And if it gets much hotter than that, bees will often shut down and spend most of their time in the nest trying to regulate the temperature there. We want it to be a fairly mild, non-windy day. Some wind is okay, but if it gets too windy, it just is going to be too hard to capture bees. And then we don't really want to be out when it's raining. So this is a nice opportunity for us to get out and hike around in beautiful weather, basically. In terms of where we want to survey, basically we're going to look for places with a lot of flowers in bloom. Bumblebees find most places in the Pacific Northwest attractive, and they spend plenty of time there foraging, and those are where we want to do surveys. So this could be natural areas, urban areas, public rights of way, and roadsides. But no matter where we go and where we choose to conduct surveys, we want to make sure that we're following the local rules and regulations. And this means that, you know, if we're surveying on private land, we want to make sure that we have permission to survey on that private land. If you're on public land, sometimes it's going to be totally fine for you to do that. Other times we have areas that are more protected than others, and you might need to get permission from the landowner. And with that in mind, we've created this sort of list to help guide you. Certainly on US Forest Service land and on BLM land, for the most part, you're free to conduct surveys on those public lands. This is just a capture and release survey. We're not killing bees. We're not collecting them. So you have permission for the most part to capture, chill, and photograph bees on these lands. When we start talking about state parks and state wildlife areas and natural areas, then we start talking about areas where you may need permission. Certainly in the state of Washington, in order to visit some of these areas and do a survey, you need to reach out to the land manager, and Anne can help facilitate that. Same thing in Oregon. If you want to survey in a state park in Oregon, please feel free to reach out to me. We're in the process of getting some permits set aside for this to allow these surveys to take place, but you'll need to be on that permit, and you'll need to let me know. So if you're interested in surveying on state parklands in the state of Oregon, please reach out to me. But generally, we want to follow good practice. We're doing a survey. I think most people are going to be interested in these surveys and let you do this, but we want to make sure that we're following the local rules and regulations when you're planning locations. Materials that you'll need, you're going to want to make sure that you have your data sheets and things to write with. You want to have an insect net and vials for your bees. We use a cooler with crushed ice to chill our bees. You'll see why a little bit later. You need a camera or a smartphone. I will say that we do recommend having a dedicated camera with a macro function if it's something that you have. They take better photographs than, generally speaking, than cell phones do at close range. A timer, or again, a smartphone can work for this. Some ability to gather weather information. And I will say that this is information you can actually even gather after you get home. You can look for a local weather station and pull up the weather information from a nearby area and use that on your data form. And then having field guides is always nice, a plant field guide and a bumblebee field guide. There are also apps for this. We have recommendations on the resources page of our website for these things. And it's always good to have a paper map. And the reason I say this is, Oregon, Washington, Idaho are large and wild, and there are a lot of areas where there's not cell service. So we recommend you not 100% depend on cellular technology for your navigation purposes. It's good to have a backup. I like those Atlas and Gazetteer books. They have the right level of detail for a lot of the areas where we go. So that's sort of a basic introduction to how you might plan a survey. I'm going to talk briefly about the two different types of surveys that fulfill the requirements of this project, and then we'll watch the video about actually how to do it. So the first option is what we call a point survey, and a point survey is you find an area within your adopted grid cell or outside of your grid cell. You can conduct, even if you don't adopt a grid cell, you can still do a survey. Like if you can only do one survey, and so it doesn't make sense for you to adopt a grid cell, you can still participate in the project and still do a single survey, and it will still contribute to this project and help us understand bumblebees throughout the Pacific Northwest. But you're going to pick basically within a grid cell, you're going to pick a single hectare site, so around 2.5 acres, and you're going to do a 45 person minute survey. And what I mean by a person minute survey is it's 45 minutes long, but if you have two people, you're actually going to survey for a total of 45 minutes, so 22.5 minutes each. If there was 3 people doing the survey, you would each survey for 15 minutes. So the total amount of search time per person, or in total with all people surveying, adds up to 45 minutes. And that's what I mean by a person minute survey. And then each survey at a point survey is a bumblebee survey, and then also a habitat assessment. And I'll talk more about that later. The second type of survey that we recommend are these roadside surveys. And this is where, instead of going out to a natural area that's a hectare large, you would pick a stretch of road that was 10 miles long. And you would pick a start point on that road and begin driving. And you would stop at the first place that you found a patch of flowers that was big enough to support a bumblebee population, or maybe not a population, but would have bumblebees foraging. And then you would stop, get out of your car, and you would conduct a shorter 15, instead of a 45-minute survey, you do a 15-minute person minute survey. And then after you'd finish your 15 person minute survey, you do a rapid habitat assessment, and then you would get back in your car and you would drive at least a half mile. And then you'd start looking for another patch of flowers. And when you found one, you would pull over and do a 15-minute survey and do another habitat survey. And you would do that 5 times. So a roadside survey consists of 5 15-minute surveys and 5 habitat surveys at each location along the way. It's important to recognize that roadside surveys can be great, particularly in like private lands, because there's this right of way along the roadside that allows you to do surveys there. But do be careful along roadsides. Wear bright colors. Make sure you're parked off the surface of the road and other people can get by you. And it's also important to recognize that sometimes, sometimes roadsides are filled with non-native plants. So we don't always get the best information from roadside surveys, but they do help us find which species are living where, and they cover a fairly large geographic area. So there's a lot of benefit from doing these as well. And just to be clear, a single, like if you're going to fulfill your requirement within the grid cell that you've adopted, if you've chosen to go that route, you could do 2 point surveys, you could do 2 roadside surveys, or you could do 1 point survey and 1 roadside survey. Yeah, 1 point survey and 1 roadside survey. And you could do all of that on the same day. So you could do 1 point survey and 1 roadside survey on the same day, and that would fulfill the requirements. But probably a better way to fulfill the requirement would be to do a point survey and then return 3 weeks later and do a second point survey at the same location. You don't have to do that. Certainly, if you're traveling to go to a location, we don't expect you to travel back to that location, 3 weeks later. But if it happens to be close by, separating 2 surveys by 3 weeks is probably the best option in terms of fulfilling the obligation for the survey project. The Bumblebee data sheets you'll find in the participant handbook. You will also find it on the website on the resources page. And this is what it looks like. When you get to the beginning of a survey, the first thing you're going to do is fill out the top of this worksheet. And this is where you put the site name and the grid cell and the date and all of those things. It's important to mark the start time and end time and survey minutes, as we've talked about. And then a new thing for this year, if you've participated in the project in the past, this is a question that was never on the survey form before. And this is basically asking you what method that you used to survey for bumblebees. Did you capture every bumblebee that you saw? Or did you focus on catching diversity? And what I mean by this is sometimes we're doing surveys in an area where there are gobs of bumblebees, like so many bumblebees that you couldn't possibly capture all of them. And then sometimes most of those bumblebees seem to be of the same species. And so it doesn't make sense to go through and collect 300 of the same species of bee. We don't necessarily need that information because of bumblebees' unique colonial life cycle. We don't learn that much about abundance information if we get 300 versus 10. But there's a lot of what we call mimicry in bumblebees. So a lot of bumblebees look similar to each other. And unless you have a very discerning eye, it can be difficult to tell these in the field. So in that situation where you've got gobs of bumblebees and they seem to be mostly the same species, what we ask that you do is collect 10 of them. And then once you have 10, you can stop collecting bees that look like that. The evidence that we have suggests if you get 10 lookalikes, if there was 2 species or maybe even 3 species in there, you will have likely picked them up by grabbing 10 of them. But then you can start focusing on diversity. And in that case, you might check this focused on capturing bumblebees that look different than those that were already caught. And if you combined these methods, let's say you started by capturing all bumblebees observed and then later switched to this, you could check both of those, and that's an option for when you submit your data. So I hope that's clear. This helps us analyze the data in terms of the different collection methods and why we're collecting this information this year. Okay, so now what I'm going to do for you is have you watch this video. This is a video I created last year that walks you through what it means to conduct a survey, how you capture bees, how we chill the bees on ice, and how we photograph the bees. And so I'm going to play this video for you, and I'll be back sort of midstream, and we'll start talking about a habitat assessment after that.
Hi, my name is Rich Hatfield. I'm a senior conservation biologist for the Xerces Society, and I'm here to teach you how to do a survey for the Pacific Northwest Bumblebee Atlas or the Nebraska Bumblebee Atlas. They both have pretty much the same survey protocols. So I'm here today. I'm in a beautiful natural area. It's a nice, warm, sunny day. I've got my net and I have some vials in my pocket, so I'm pretty much ready to do a survey. The first thing you want to do is make sure that the site is big enough. It needs to be about a hectare. And a hectare is about the size of a football field, lengthwise, square. So sort of a football long and the same distance wide. It's 100 square meters, so a football field, including the end zones. Another way to think about it is the infield of a track. If you ever ran track, the entire infield on the inside of a running track is about a hectare. Or a soccer field is also about a hectare. So you want to make sure it's big enough. And then usually what I do once I decide that it's a big enough site is I walk around and I make sure that there's enough flowering resources. You want to make sure that there is something that bees could be visiting. Otherwise, it's probably not worth really conducting a survey, or maybe come back at a later date when there are flowers. One of the things you want to do when you're out pre-walking your site is make sure you're keeping an eye out for inconspicuous flowers. Sometimes flowers will grow down amongst the grass, but they can be important for bumblebees and often are. This plant is called self-heal and often grows underneath the understory or overstory of grass and is a great bumblebee plant. Another important thing when we're out looking for bumblebees is we want to make sure we're looking at all blooming plants. If I was standing here looking in this patch, I might be drawn to the violets, to the dandelions, or maybe to the bluebells over here. But in reality, one of the most attractive plants in this patch has green, inconspicuous flowers, but bumblebees love it. This is a plant called waterleaf, and the flowers aren't quite open yet because it's still very early in the season here. But these little green guys here are going to bloom into little beautiful little flowers that hang down sort of under the understory, and they often can't be seen. But bumblebees like Bombus flavifrons and other long-tongued species really love these flowers and will visit them. So while you may not be drawn to them with your own eyes, it's really important to pay attention to what's blooming and making sure that we're spending time looking at all the flowering resources on the landscape, looking for different species of bumblebees. Other things you may want to look for as you're doing a pre-walk around your site are things that may be a potential hazard. You may want to avoid plants like poison oak or blackberry, although it is notable that both of these plants do flower and can be attractive to bumblebees. You'll also want to look out for holes or other things to avoid, like electric lines, fences, barbed wire. Just make sure you're safe while you're doing your survey. You also want to keep an eye out for property lines to make sure you're not crossing from public land onto private land. And also keep an eye out for areas that you may want to spend a couple more minutes, areas with high quality forage that you know are especially attractive to bumblebees. Or keep an eye out for blooming trees, meaning don't forget to look up. There are sometimes flowers that are above your head that can also be attractive to bumblebees. Once you've finished your pre-walk, you're ready to start your survey. Materials that you want to make sure that you have with you before you begin your survey are an insect net, jars to place your bumblebees, a cooler with crushed ice. Make sure you have a timer. And then for processing your bees, you'll need your data sheets as well as a camera. We recommend having a dedicated camera, ideally with a macro function, but in a pinch, a smartphone can work as long as you learn how to control your white balance and take high quality photos with it. I typically set up a station in the middle of my survey area, which has the cooler and the area where I'll process the bees later. And then I grab a handful of vials and head out to go conduct my survey. And when you're conducting your survey, you want to make sure it's 45 minutes long, and that's 45 person minutes. So if you're doing it with a friend, you would do it for 22 and a half minutes. And if you did it with 2 other friends, it would be for 15 minutes. You just want to have 45 total minutes of search time. The important thing also is that when you're doing a survey, you want to pause the timer while you catch a bee. So it's 45 minutes of searching, not 45 total minutes. So you want to pause the timer when you catch a bee and while you're putting that bee into a vial and while you're putting that vial into the cooler. That doesn't count for your search time. The other thing that's important while you're doing your survey is you want to make sure that you're associating every bee observation that you have with a flower. So one of the important things about the Atlas project is we want to learn what resources that bees are using. So while you're out collecting bees off of flowers, you want to make sure to record that information so that we can gather it later and use that information when we analyze the data from the project. So with each bee that you capture, you want to also record the flower on which you captured it. Catching a bumblebee in a net is not an easy task. It takes a lot of practice. So one of the things that we recommend is that you spend some time practicing in your backyard before you go out and actually conduct your survey. That way you'll get some competency and some confidence so that when you see a bumblebee during your survey, you'll actually be able to net it. There are really 2 different ways to go after a bumblebee on a flower. One way is to just swing your net and try to catch it in there like this. The important thing is after you've swung, you want to make sure to turn your net over to close the bottom of it so that the bee doesn't come flying right out into your face. There's a number of ways to do that. I like to do a little flip, but the easiest way to do it is to swing and then just turn the net over 1-2 times. And then you'll have the bee in this section of the net that's laying over the top. The other way to go after a bee instead of sweeping is to just go over the top and drop the net on the bee like that. That way the bee will be trapped in the net. The next step then would be to grab the bottom of the net and pull it up to the top, and the bee will fly right to the top of the net because it's attracted to the sun. Let's see if we can find some bees to practice on. Sometimes you just have to go and follow for her a bit. She looks like she's looking for a nest, so they can be really hard to track. But we can just throw the net over the top of them like that sometimes while they're flying. And I got her. I can see her moving in the net there. So what I do is I pull the net then up to the top and make sure she's under there. I see her right in there, and then I can put her in the vial. Okay, so now that I have a bee in the net, what I need to do is get the bee from a net into the vial. And the way I'm going to do that, she's somewhere in this folded over area. I can see her crawling around right here. And so what I want to do is make sure she gets all the way down to the bottom of the net. So what I can do is I can just take the net and just go back and forth a couple of times and then fold it over, and then I like to grab it when I know she's above my hand here. So I know that she's between my hand and the bottom of the net. And then I can take my jar, take the top off, but I want to keep that cap close by. And so then what I do is I stick the jar into the net, and it goes through my hand here, okay, so that there's no way for the bee to get out. And then what I can do is just sort of move the net around until I'm sure that I have the bee in the net. And unfortunately, my net is very dirty, so it's hard for me to see. But I can hear her. I know she's in there. And usually you'll hear that sound when you know she's in your jar. I know that she's in the jar. And now I can just use the net basically as the top of my jar. So I'm just going to reach my hand in, and again I'm going to grab that plastic vial, and I'm just pulling the top of the net over the top of the jar, so the net is still serving as the top until I get to the edge, and then I'm just going to slide it directly into and put the cap directly on, and then I can close the top and I can see the bee there in the jar. And that is how you transfer, or at least one method for transferring a bee from a net into a jar. Okay, so now I want to show you another method for getting a bee from a net into a vial. You can see the bees crawling around in the vial right here, and I'm sorry, in the net right there, and I want to get her into the vial. So one thing is a good thing to do. Some people just aren't comfortable holding the net while they do this, so they like to put it on the ground. But you can see if I hold the net straight up, the bee will fly all the way to the top of the net, okay? And then I can move forward. So some people just like to set it on the ground and then use the ground sort of as the cap, and then stick the vial into the net. And then again, same principle. You can pin the bee against the net as the top, and then you can stick your other hand in there and just put the cap on, and then you'll have the bee in the jar. Simple as that. And then what we want to do is we want to take the bee once it's in a vial, and we're going to put it into the ice pack. And it's ideal to stick it as far into the ice as we can so that the ice is completely surrounding the bee, and then it'll chill very quickly so that we can take the photographs that we need to take. Normally, one of the things that I would do in this situation is I would take the flower that I captured this bee on, and I would put it into the jar so that later when I was processing my bees, I could know which flower that I caught this bee on. And keeping track of that is very important for the data we're collecting for the Atlas project. Or in this case, because this bee wasn't visiting a flower, it was just flying around, it's not going to have any floral association. So if I don't put a flower in there, then I'll know that when I process my data later. But if I'd captured this bee on, say, a dandelion, I could come over to a dandelion flower and just grab the flower off and pretty easily just tuck the flower into the jar with the bee. And then later when I process this bee, I'd have the flower and the bee in the same jar so that I can keep track of it. Other people like to take notes and have a notebook, and they will number their vial and say this would be bee number 1. They could go bee number 1 and they would write down the flower, or take a picture of the bee next to the flower. There's lots of different ways to keep track of it. We don't care which way you do it. We just care that you do it. So when I finish my survey, I like to get a station set up to take my photographs. I want to make sure that I have everything I have and everything I need before I get started, because when I take the bees out of the cooler, they're going to start warming up, and I want to make sure that I have everything. So I want to make sure that I have my data sheet and a pencil that has lead in it. So I want to make sure I can take my notes. And I want to make sure that I have my camera. The other thing I like to do is make sure that my camera is set so the pictures I'm going to take are appropriate for the lighting conditions. So I usually will take a cap of a vial or something like that and make sure that I have my camera in the right settings before I get started, so I don't have to wait while the bee is warming up. So I get it in my macro setting and make sure that the pictures that I take look good. So here I am, I'm going to take a picture, and that looks pretty good. You can see here it looks pretty good. I could probably add a little bit of light. It's a little bit dark, so I may change the white balance a little bit, but for the most part it looks pretty good. So once I'm ready and I've got the information that I need, I can start processing my bees. But first I want to make sure I've filled out the top of my data sheet. So I have my site name and my grid cell ID in here, along with the date and the survey method, my weather information, and the surveyors and the survey time. All of that's entered on the data sheet, and I can get ready to enter the bees. Now each line on your data sheet here is going to represent a vial. So each bee that you captured gets its own line. So you're going to enter what bumblebee species that you think it is, its host plant, and then the photo numbers that you need, that you took of that bee. I'm going to move and process my bees in the direct sunlight here because it often will take a different picture, or a better picture, if you have direct sunlight. Sometimes it's too bright. You just have to take a look at the pictures that come out of your camera and adjust your settings and your location appropriately. And I can't stress this enough. I get way too many photos that people took that are out of focus, or are too bright, or are too dark. And if someone goes through all of this trouble of collecting bees, puts bees in jars and bees in the jars in a cooler, and then takes pictures that doesn't allow me to identify them, a lot of that effort has been wasted. So taking pictures is really the most important thing that you can do. And I want you to make sure to get your settings right and take the time you need to get the best pictures that you can. So I'm ready, my station's all set up, I have everything I need. I can grab my first bee out of the cooler. And once you take a bee out of the cooler, you'll know she's ready to be processed if you can kind of shake the jar back and forth, and she moves pretty freely in there. That's when you know she's ready to be processed. And so usually what I do is I'll just dump her out onto some surface, and if you have white, that's great, it works really well. Other colors can work too. Darker colors, just something that's flat and neutral usually helps pretty well. So one of the things that we can do when we look at our bee, remember there's a lot of different photos that I need. I need to be able to see the picture of the face. I need to be able to see a picture of the thorax. And I need to be able to see a picture of the abdomen, including all of the segments back there. And for yellow-faced, yellow-striped bees, I need to see a picture of the underside of the abdomen. That allows me to tell the differences between some very close look-alike species. So when they're completely out is a great time to take a picture of that underside of the abdomen if you have that species. And in this case, I do. So I want to get really close if you can, and this is why a camera with a macro setting is really the best option. You want to get as close as you can, and you want to take a nice picture of the underside of the abdomen. Okay, so now I can see the color of those hairs on the abdomen, which is exactly what I need to see. Also, when she's in this position, I can often take a very good picture of the face. And it's nice to take a nice close-up like this, because then I can see the cheek length as well as the color of the hairs on her face and the colors of the hair on the top of her head. I also like to include a profile shot like this. Okay? And one of the nice things about a shot like this is I can see the hairs on the face, on the thorax, and on the abdomen. And now I want to be able to make sure that I can see every single segment on that abdomen and then the color patterns there. So you want to sometimes peel those wings apart and make sure you get a nice clear shot. It's okay if your hand is in there, but we really just want to be able to see all of the segments back there on the abdomen. Perfect. And then she's ready. I've taken all of the photos that I need for her. You can see there that her foot is starting to twitch a little bit and she's starting to wake up. But I've taken all the pictures that I can of her. And so what I can do is I can actually just set her in the sun and let her warm up. And she'll slowly warm up and groom herself and fly away. And then I can go on and process the next bee. But before I do that, I want to make sure I enter this one on my data sheet. So because this has a yellow face and a yellow stripe, and you notice that all the hairs on the underside there were black, I know that this is Bombus vosnesenskii. And if you don't know the species of bee that it is, it's totally fine. You can just write Bombus here. And I'm going to write the host plant. In this case, there is no host plant. I found this bee just flying around, probably looking for a nest site. So I'm just going to write nest searching. And then I want to write the photo numbers. So in my camera here, I'm going to open it up, and I'm going to open up, and I'm going to take a look at the photos that I took. And down here, it's going to tell me the number of the photo that I took. And I want to record that information on the data sheet. So these photos started at 2319, and I'm going to write that on here, and that goes through 2324. Okay, and now that's all the photos that I've taken of that bee, and I've entered all the information that I need to from that particular bee on the data sheet. Now I can process my next bee. Again, I can shake the bee in the jar, and if she moves around freely, I know that she's ready to be processed. I can dump her out onto the table. And again, this is not a yellow-faced, yellow-striped bee, so I don't need a picture of the underside of the abdomen. I just need a picture that shows the face, head, thorax, and abdomen. And I can get a lot of that from a single shot with this bee, the way that she's set up. I can get a nice profile shot. And there I can see pretty much everything I need to from a single photo. I'm going to roll her over on her back to make sure that I get a photo of the cheek length and of the face. Sometimes the antennae get in the way there, so you want to make sure, if you can, to get the photo that you need. Okay? So there, really, with just two pictures, I can get everything that I need. But there, in this case, I can also get a nice shot there that'll show me every segment of the abdomen. And this species here is Bombus mixtus. It's got brown hairs at the very back of its abdomen, that little crescent on T2 there. And you can see it's got cloudy hairs on its thorax. So a mix of yellow and black hairs and a nice short cheek. So I'm done processing that bee, and I can put her in the sun as well. So now I can write this one as Bombus mixtus. She was also nest searching. And the photo numbers, again, I go into my camera, I press preview, and this goes through 2327. So this is going to be 2325 to 2327. One of the things you can do when you're done processing your bees is you can actually hold them in your hands. It's a really neat opportunity to get up close and personal with a bee and see how they move their wings and groom themselves. It's a really, really neat opportunity. But they do warm up pretty quickly, and it's pretty neat to watch them fly away and notice that even after being in a cooler for a long time, they can go out about their business and just fly away. Oh, there she goes.
So after you're done with conducting your bumblebee survey, you're going to do what's called a rapid habitat survey. And we're hoping these rapid habitat surveys will take you around 5 to 20 minutes or so. They shouldn't be totally exhaustive. They're basically just a snapshot in time of what kind of habitat you're surveying in and what habitat surrounds you, how many different plant species there are, how much of that area was in bloom, and what management you observed could be occurring in those areas. And a little bit more detail about what that looks like. This is the data sheet. Again, you'll find this in the participant handbook and also links on our website. The information at the top of the website or at the top of the data sheet is the same on both the Bumblebee and the habitat form. It's good to have some duplicity here in case you forget one of your data sheets or you lose one of your data sheets. At least you retrieve a lot of information that's consistent between the two. So again, you're just going to take sort of the names, the site name will be the same, the grid cell ID will be the same, and the date and the survey type, and the weather information and the latitude and longitude. All that information is going to be pretty much the same between the two habitat or between the two data sheets. And then the first question that you're going to ask, and this shouldn't, part of the reason this won't take you very long is you will have already spent 45 minutes, walking around this 1 hectare site. So you'll be fairly familiar with a lot of the features of it, and you should be able to answer some of these questions pretty quickly. So the first one is which of these 7 habitat types was the dominant habitat type for the survey type? Were you in a grassland and meadow, a woodland and forest, shrub, scrub, agricultural land, riparian areas, in developed or roadside areas, or in a wetland? Those are the 7 options for this year. There are examples here that you would choose from, and you're going to circle one of those. It's possible that your survey type is going to have more than one habitat type in it. We want you to choose the most abundant one. That's how we're going to look at these data. So if you had, say, a grassland with a stream rolling through it, you would choose grassland because grassland is going to be the dominant type, and then riparian or stream would be sort of a secondary type. And you could add that into the surrounding area. And the surrounding area basically means from your habitat type or from your survey area, what types of different habitats do you see? And you're going to use the same 7 habitat types, and you're going to list up to the top 3. We definitely want you to list the top surrounding habitat type. And then if there are multiple, go ahead and add the second most common and the third most common there. You don't have to. It's just if you happen to see different habitat types that you feel like should be added to that, you will add them into that box there on the right, and the same 7 habitat types. The next question is how much of the survey area has flowering resources, from 0 to basically 100%. And this is not a percent cover question. You're not thinking about if I was flying above the survey type and I looked down from a drone, how much of it would be flowers versus something else. It's a bit of a different question, which is, I think of it as how much of the survey site were you actively searching for bumblebees as you walked around? Some areas are quite patchy, and you basically, you'll be in a patch of flowers looking for bees, and then you need to walk 50 feet or 100 feet to find another patch of flowers. There's other sites where it's 10 feet that you have to walk, or it's no feet and there's just flowers everywhere, like the photo on the right here. And so that photo on the right, while it's not 100% flower cover, basically anywhere that I would be, as far as you can see there, I could look for a bee on a flower and potentially capture one. Whereas on the left over there, I'm going to be walking pretty long distances in between flower patches. And so I'd be closer to the 0 scale. So that's the way to think about this, is within your hectare, how much of the area were you actively searching for bumblebees on flowers? And that's how to think about this question. Next, you're going to look at different habitat features that contribute to nesting. So these are all things that we know may provide habitat for nesting bumblebees. So bunch grasses is one option, and you could choose bunch grasses if you see those. In this case, I see those tall brown patches coming up there are bunch grasses. I would add those, and then there's a brush pile there on the right. So I would check those 2 boxes, and if I saw anything else, I would check the rest of those as well. Then you're going to look at some of the management things going on there. So you're going to see if you have seen evidence of mowing or grazing or insecticide or herbicide use or fire or honeybees. And you're going to answer these to the best of your ability. It may be that you don't know everything, and that's okay. You're just going to answer to the best of your ability whether you see these or whether you suspect them based on what you see. You might see a fire scar, or you might see evidence of mowing. These things, even if you don't know they're happened, you may see evidence that some of this has happened before. Or you may not see cows, but you might see cow pies or hoof prints, or you might see deer scat, whatever. These are things that little pieces of evidence that will help you answer these questions. Then you're going to turn the form over, and on the back, on the top, there's a question that asks you how many different species of flower are blooming. You're going to answer this 1 to 2, 2 to 5, 5 to 10, greater than 10. And then you're going to go through and actually list those plants on the back here. So which plants did you actually see blooming, and the common name, and ideally you'll also find a scientific name. And then you could also list the photo numbers here that you could include then when you submit your bumblebee data. You could add a photo of each of the plant when you submit your bumblebee data. And then at the bottom of that form is now an option for you to add some of your volunteer information in here. So you're going to put, the start and stop time from when you left your house and when you returned, how many miles you drove, and then how much time you spent organizing your data and naming your photos and all of those other things. One thing to just talk about briefly here is just because we didn't see this section, I'm pulling up a series of slides here that I might not have otherwise shown, but we really want to, the most important contribution that you all can make in this project is through submitting photographs. Taking high quality photos is really what we need you to do. We have bumblebee taxonomists and experts that can identify bees from photos. And what we need you to do is take the right photos so that we can make the identifications that we need to, or that we're able to. And so taking the time to take good, high quality, clear photos makes all the difference in the world. If someone has gone through all of the effort to capture bumblebees, put them in jars, chill those bumblebees in a cooler until they're immobile, and then take photos that are not clear, is in some ways a waste of effort, right? We've spent all this time going out there and we're not getting the data that we need. So taking that extra time to take the clear photos makes all the difference in the world. And so just taking, it doesn't mean that you have to be a professional photographer by any stretch of the imagination. These do not need to be beautiful photographs. They just need to be clear. And so taking a few extra minutes to learn how to use your cell phone camera, if you're using your cell phone, which means how to use tap focus, how to change the white balance by dragging up and down. These features are available on your smartphone, and just learning how to use them a little bit can make a huge difference in terms of outcomes. But the photos that we need of bees, we need to see the head, including the front of the face and the top of the head. Sometimes the vertex versus the face will have different colors. We need to see the patterns on the thorax. So we need to see sort of in front of the wings, between the wings, and behind the wings, as well as below the wings. What's happening below the wings can be very meaningful. And then on top of that, we need to see all of the a photo that shows the color patterns on all of the abdominal segments for the bee. And we'll talk a little bit more about bumblebee anatomy in the next section here. But just know that these are the photos that we need to see. And again, just some examples of sort of some clear photos and some not so clear photos. On a bright sunny day, it can be hard to take photos, and you just need to take some time and look at your photos after you take them and think about whether someone could see adequate detail there, right? So in this photo on the far left, that's pretty high quality photo. You can see a lot of features, but I can't see the abdomen there. So you would need another photo. And sort of those next three photos, you know, they're sort of lacking in detail. We can do better than those, especially with a still bumblebee. So taking the time, taking an extra photo, making sure things are in focus and clear is really, really important. And then if you need to sort of use your fingers to pull the wings apart and you know, so that we can see all of the segments, sometimes there's important features that are obscured by those wings. So pulling the wings apart, taking a photo, if your finger's in there, it's totally fine. We just need to be able to see those features. All right, I'm going to try to play another video for you here, which will show you how to submit data in Bumblebee Watch. There's a new methodology for this year. And so I want you to see how the new features of Bumblebee Watch work. When you get ready to submit your data, you want to make sure that you have both of your data sheets, your habitat data sheet and your Bumblebee data sheet. Once you have both of these things, you can navigate over to Bumblebee Watch. Once you're there, you want to make sure that you've signed in, and then you can go to record a sighting and choose Bumblebee sighting. If you're just submitting an incidental sighting here, so just a single observation that wasn't part of a survey, you want to click project here and choose Bumblebee Watch. But if you're submitting data as part of the Bumblebee Atlas project, including a habitat survey, you're going to choose PNW Bumblebee Atlas. When you do this, this will open up all of the habitat forms that you will include as you submit your data. If you just choose Bumblebee Watch, these forms here don't show up. So you're going to start by just using the information from your data sheet. The top of the form, or this whole first page, is all information that you'll find on the habitat data sheet. So you can go to your habitat data sheet, you have your site name, you have your latitude, your longitude, and the date, and you can copy all those things directly into the form. So here, the name of my location was testing 321. My latitude was 46.2144. And the longitude is negative 124.99. You want to make sure to include that negative sign in there. It's essential. All longitudes in the Western Hemisphere have a negative sign in front of them. So please include that when you enter your data, or your point will end up in the ocean somewhere. Then you're going to choose the state, how accurate the location was. For a survey as part of the atlas that was a hectare large, you're going to choose either 25 to 50 meters or 50 to 100 meters here. And the date of the sighting, I did this sighting on May 19th. And then you're going to scroll down and you'll see more information that you're going to pull directly off your habitat data sheet. So I can go back to my habitat data sheet. I see that I did a point survey. In this case, I know that I tried to capture all bees. Okay, I started at 2:30, I ended at 3:30, and had 45 survey minutes. Okay, so it was a point survey. I captured all bees observed. It was 1 hectare. I had 1 surveyor. My survey began at 2:30 p.m. and I ended at 3:30 p.m. and that was 45 survey minutes. So these are the person minutes, which means I stopped my timer for about 15 minutes while I was transferring bees during the survey. The temperature, again, off my data sheet was 68 degrees. The cloud cover was 10%. The wind speed was 0 to 5. And if I had any weather notes, I could add them here. And this was in degrees Fahrenheit. Now I can scroll down and there's more information I'll have to get from my habitat data form here. So I pull up my habitat data sheet. I noticed that the survey area was grassland meadow and the surrounding habitats was woodland, forest, and riparian. So I can enter those in the data sheet. So I'm going to choose grassland here, woodland, forest, and riparian. And you can see when you choose the second habitat type, it will bring up a third one. The third one or even the second one are optional. We only want to enter the most common ones here and in that order. So woodland forest was the most common, and there was also a stream next to this site. How much of the survey area had flowering resources? Again, I can go back to my data sheet. I circled 30 here, so I'm going to enter 30 here. Which nesting sites did I see? I saw bunch grasses, brush piles, and pine needle duff. So I'm going to choose bunch grasses, pine needles, and brush piles. And down here, I'm going to enter all of my management notes. And when I look at my data sheet, I see that I had no under everything except for native grazing, which I suspected. So for mowing, no. Livestock grazing, no. Native grazing, I suspect that. No agriculture, no honeybees, no fire, no herbicide, and no insecticides. If you had any management notes here, say about the fire or about the number of honeybees, you might put this in here. Now I'm going to go back to my data sheet, and it says that I saw 1 to 2 species of flower in bloom, and this was the species that I found. So I'm going to say that I saw 1 to 2 species here. I'm going to say lupin, and I'm going to type in the specific name here. In this case, this was not a volunteer effort for me because I work for the Xerces Societies, but for you, you would choose yes here, and then you could enter the time that you spent surveying, including your drive time, as well as the number of miles that you drove. So all this information is getting collected in Bumblebee Watch now. And then also, if you used our online resources for training purposes, you would enter yes here, and that would allow you to enter all of these data. In this case, I'm going to choose no in both of these cases because it is a no. And then I'm going to proceed and hit next, and it will take me to the next site. And now this is where I'm going to enter the bumblebees that I observed in my survey. And so again, I'm going to go back to my data sheet, but this time I'm going to go to the bumblebee data sheet. And you can see that I've entered all of the survey information, and I've already entered that in. But you can see that I have one bee to enter here, which is Bombus centralis. It was on Lupinus lepidus. And here's the photo numbers of the bee and the flower. So in this case, I'm going to go back, and I want to open up the folder with the right pictures in it. So here's 2020, 2021, and 2024. And I can just drag all of those in here, and it will automatically enter them into or upload them into the database. If I want to, I can open up the identification tool, and it will open up for those of you that have used Bumblebee Watch before, it'll open up the window that you have seen before, where you can look at your photos and then choose the different features of the bee that you see. So in this case, this has a yellow face, it has a stripe down the middle of its thorax, and it goes red, yellow. So this looks like it's probably Bombus centralis. And then you can choose that, and it will automatically enter it here. Most of you won't see this count box. This is just something for more advanced users that will see this. And you wouldn't see gender either, but in this case I do. So I'm going to choose 1 here, and this was a worker. And then you can enter the host notes here, and any observation or floral notes that you wanted to add. Note that now you can add up to 5 photos here. So we really want you to include pictures of the plant in addition to the pictures of the bee. So you can see here, one of the photos that I've uploaded for this species is just a picture of the cap of the here, you can see it. If I go in here, you can see it's a picture of the cap of the bee that I captured next to the plant that I captured. And when you take a picture of that plant, we want to make sure we get the flowers and the leaves in here. And then we're done. If I had another bee to enter, I could choose add another here, and it could add a second bee to this observation. In this case, I don't, so I'm going to delete that. And then I'm just going to click save, and you can see that it's been saved and the time matches the timestamp. And then I'm done. I can choose view checklist, and it'll take me to my profile page, and it'll show me all of the data that I just entered, including some information about the survey, and then there's the bee I had. And if I needed to, I could edit the species here. So I could choose edit species, and it would take me back, and I could add another if I wanted to, or I could change the species name or anything else. In this case, I don't have to. And I can go back here and go to view checklist, and I can also edit the checklist. So if I choose edit checklist here, it would take me back and allow me to change some of the information that was in my habitat form here. But I don't need to do that. And so I am done. And that's it. That's all it takes to enter your data. Hopefully this helps streamline the process for many of you, and will make entering our data more efficient. Thanks. Okay, hopefully that was tolerable. It seemed to be doing pretty well on my end. So that's the end of that section. I know there may be a lot of questions because you weren't able to see the video. I'm happy to take some time now and answer any of those questions that may have come up, or we can move on and talk about taking photos and identifying bees in the Pacific Northwest. Anything that's out there that needs to be addressed?
I think we're pretty good, Rich. Pretty much caught up on the Q&A and chat.
Great.
I believe.
Okay. Let's just take a couple minutes here. It's 3:14 now. We'll come back, say at 3:17 or so, or 3:17. Just take 3 minutes for a personal break if you need it. And then we'll get started with the next section in a few minutes.
Rich, we just had a question pop up on how to deal with clear cuts. Like if you're surveying a clear cut inside a forest, is that grassland meadow? It's not really forest because it doesn't have trees. How would you classify that?
That's a good question. I think it would largely depend on the vegetation that was coming up. If you found that it was a lot of shrubs, like sometimes ceanothus pops up in there and it's dominated by shrubs, you might choose shrub scrub. There, I could also imagine that if grasslands, if it was a lot of grasses that popped up, you might choose grassland. I guess the other option to think about, and I hadn't thought about this previously, so I'm thinking in real time, and some input from you, Joel, might be interesting, but we could also choose developed there. I'm not sure. Do you have a thought or a better answer than the one I just came up with?
No, I don't. I haven't thought about that well either. I do think that it would depend on what's there. Obviously, it's not forest. You wouldn't put down forest because we want forest sites to be confined to canopy cover sites. If it's got a lot of grasses, it would be meadow grassland. If it's mainly shrub, it would be shrub scrub.
Okay.
Developed, I'm not sure. I can't see a line of logic where I put developed because that's just so different than like true, human urban area developed.
Yeah. Well, we include like power lines in developed, so that's why I was thinking that. But but I think I agree that we should. I mean, sometimes they're also intentionally seeded with stuff, but I think just going by the dominant vegetation type would be the way to do it.